Hello and welcome to a special video. In today's video, I want to talk about the overhaul of the recruitment structures being led by uh, Vivell and Jason Wilcox at Manchester United. Now, obviously, in the last week or so, it was made official that Christopher Vivell would be staying at United for the long term, for the future. Now, back when Dan Ashworth was let go, I was given the information and passed it along that I believed that Wilcox and Vivell would be the guys moving forward in combination to essentially take up the overall director of football recruitment role, and that they would likely not be bringing in some other big name to head this up. And that is exactly what has happened. And I want to talk through in this video specifically, a little bit of track record on each of them, a little bit of what they've done at United so far, what they're being essentially recognized for by Omar Barada and the ownership, and also talk about the real problems behind Manchester United's recruitment issues, even including last year, and move forward into what they're going to look at doing in the future. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting and a big kind of overhaul. So I've had some conversations in the last week and investigated this a little bit. I mentioned that I wanted to look into it more. Now, earlier in the week, I think I did a live talking about some of this stuff. Kind of talked through the general gist of it. I think it was on Tuesday or Wednesday in a video talking about what it might look like, where United are going, some of the shift in focus to younger players and things like that. But I want to talk it through and really kind of explain, how it is going to work, but explain as well the problem. So yes, like some of the favorite videos that I have, we have a PowerPoint for today. So let's get into it. Vivell and Wilcox and the recruitment overhaul that they're going to be seeing at Manchester United. So talk about Jason Wilcox first, even though my face is blocking his face a little bit here. He's the Manchester City Academy coach from 2012 to 2017. He's actually also a Premier League winner as a football player, which shouldn't be completely ignored as well. He does have a history of success in football as a player, and he has won the league. He then was appointed to the academy director and maintained that role for another 5 years at Manchester City. Now, during this period that he was a coach and then director, it has to be said that Manchester City saw and have become probably the best academy team in all of England. They've produced an enormous amount of talent that has been, of course, in a little bit of a different model. Not as much of it has come through the first team as you would like to see at a club like United, but a lot of it has been sold around. I mean, to players like, from Jadon Sancho to Lavia to so many more out there at the moment, and obviously some of the players currently in City's first team. But Man City even today continue to be the team at the top of the youth table. Impressive. They are able to sell players for immense amounts of money because people rate their academy so highly, and he is a big part and responsible for that. He then had a pretty brief tenure, that to be said, at Southampton as the director of football. However, he did help get them promoted. Essentially, was a big part in getting them promoted, even though they're heading straight back down this season. And he is, of course, the current acting sporting director, and essentially as close as you get to, in this United current iteration, the director of football of the club. There's a few things that have been focused on with him, where they've liked the views that he's brought, what he's looked at. The first of those is his focus on academy success and faster decisions. You'll recall that I spoke a bit earlier about them wanting to be more ruthless with the academy, wanting to be more ruthless with the players. And what that really means, however, just to be very clear, is quicker decisions on, do they get to the first team? Do they go out on loan? Do we sell them and get buybacks in? When they get above 18 years old and they start playing for the under 21s, those decisions have to be made a lot faster when they start becoming those fringe first team players. So we saw they obviously moved a bit quicker on certain players over the summer, on moving them out. They got more players on loan in January, and they want to continue this into summer where players who are, 18, 19, 20, that it is a fast decision. Are you getting to the first team? Are we loaning you out? Are we selling you? And to be much quicker in that rather than letting too many players sit and stagnate in the youth levels for too long when they're at an age where you should know and where they need to be playing first team football if they're going to become anything. That's a huge focus of Jason Wilcox and what he brings to the table, and his view and how he ran essentially the Man City Academy as well. and that doesn't mean not promoting players, to be very, very clear. It means you just have to make decisions quicker. And I think we're already seeing some of that. Cheeto Obi Martin, I should say Cheeto Obi. That is his name. That's what he wants to be called. Cheeto Obi, obviously he was purchased and brought in a big part with Wilcox and such, but also already promoted to the first team. And this week, missing the FA Youth Cup game today, which is a big surprise to stay with the first team. So it's obviously they're making the decision. Good, let's just get him into this first team environment, keep him playing there, and accelerate things on this. He worked with Omar previously, but he impressed them dramatically when he first came in. He was essentially tasked with evaluating the overall structures of the club, evaluating Ten Hag, and evaluating the squad when he came in at the beginning of the closer to the beginning of the year, like April rather, towards the end of last season, but before summer. He made sweeping recommendations, including that the manager had to be changed. His big focus as well was on game model, on looking at what was the established game model, where did United want to go moving forward, what was the best way to play in terms of the modern game to be successful in the regular, and he did not feel that the squad was being built in that fashion, nor that the manager was coaching the team towards that fashion. And so he recommended a significant change. He was pretty scathing actually of the team, of the coach and all of that prior to summer. And from their side, they pretty much regret that they did not follow through on his recommendations because, essentially, obviously the point that we're at now, we've kind of seen it. They ended up letting go of Dan Ashworth. And Wilcox kind of elevated himself. And if you recall, during that time, I was regularly stating that, they were really impressed with him, but unfortunately, they did not follow through on his recommendation at the end of summer. Well, he gave that at the end of the season, rather, on May 14th, I think it was. They had that meeting down in Nice, a whole executive meeting. He said we need to make a replacement, started interviewing managers, all of that. They did not get that done at that time. But he was the main point of evaluation in the squad, the main point of contact for the coach, main point of contact for the in-between the higher-ups and the squad itself and everything, and that's what he continues to be now. And his job is essentially laying all the groundwork for the game model that United are going to be playing and building upon moving forward, and ensuring that the coach is doing that. And a big part of, even during the season, Erik Ten Hag getting sacked, losing his job, was due to the failure to implement a successful game model that was in alignment with the club's values and where they wanted to go. And it's why the results at the present are not as, what would you say, damaging, that they're not as concerning. They're not really looking at it on a game-by-game basis in terms of results with Amorim coming in, because essentially the primary goal here is lay down a very successful game model, a way to play moving forward that will dictate what they do on the pitch, but it's also because it's the only way that they can start to make effective recruitment. So this is what Wilcox is here to do. Make the decision on that. He's made that decision, laid down, this is what we want, this is how we want to play, this is where we're going, and is evaluating Amorim on that basis, as well as looking at recruitment on that basis. Now, Chris Vivell, he was the Hoffenheim analysis and scouting for some time. He ended up at Red Bull, became the head of Red Bull Salzburg scouting and recruitment. Guys like Haaland, Šeško, Upamecano, Adeyemi, there's a lot of examples of players that have come in through the whole system with him, but definitely has a track record of finding and bringing in creatively the best young talents from around the world, even at low cost, players that are in some cases completely unknown into the system, and all of that. Has a very, very strong track record on doing that, on getting young players coming in and everywhere. He was at Chelsea very briefly, but with all of the hires and overhauls that they made, he essentially left there due to the lack of a key role that he was supposed to have, that he was not able to then carry out the things he wanted to carry out at that club. At United, his focus will be on young emerging talent worldwide. So looking around, like your Diego Leones, your Sekou Kones, your these types of players, but also, not necessarily just 18-year-olds, but guys like Nene Dorgelis, where he will know them, and plenty of others where he's looking at, who are the best young players in this like 18 to 21, 23 bracket that are maybe not so known yet, emerging talents, right? Talents that are coming out, but that are not like on everybody's radar. They haven't already made their big move and things like that. And what he's looking for specifically are players who are potential Premier League level talents that have a Premier League level physicality that match the game model, and looking for them. He has a valuable network of contacts in his system, as well as, and including, a number of players from Africa. He's definitely had a good record of bringing in players from Africa, and ideally, United are able to stretch our recruitment into including players just not necessarily always already in Europe as well, and we've seen that again with Kone, with Diego Leon, with these types of players from Africa, from South America, that we want to get them. And we've seen in the past that we've identified certain players from different places but never ended up going to them. And he is a key part of this overall full recruitment department overhaul. It is not just, he's not just there to say, okay, well, who's your network, recommend some players, but to really and firmly overhaul the entire structure alongside Jason Wilcox. Because let's look at the problems in recruitment. And this is, the problems in recruitment are often on the surface level looked to be one thing, whereas the cause is potentially something else. What looks like what looks like the problem is constant overpaying. Now that is a problem. It looks like that often happens because we have no options. Like where's the scouts? Where's the recommendation of options? Why are we so fixated on one player? Failed transfers where we sign players, it should work, it doesn't work, it fails, we pay high wages. And, these are the apparent problems. What it looks like from the outside is that the bad scouts we have are not finding great players, and it's always the obvious and things like that. So we've got plenty of examples of different things like this. Rasmus Højlund and Anthony were massively overpaying, where it seems like we didn't have alternative options and we ended up paying enormous fees for them. Casemiro, where it was like, again, why didn't we have more options for midfielders at that time? Well, we spent the whole summer focused on Frankie de Jong, ended up with Casemiro paying huge wages, and then situations like Caicedo, where it's like, hey, there's this great young player that was identified, and where were United in making that happen, even though they did look at him? And there's plenty of examples of that. So on the surface, it looks like this is the problem, right? That we these are the things we see are the problems. Overpaying, no options, failed transfers, high wages, bad scouts, not finding great players. That's what we see. It all kind of seems like that's what happens. And it does. But why? And what is underlying that? That is what United are setting out essentially to fix. Because the actual problems underneath this are things like poor reporting structures, where, say, you've got all these scouts and all these analysts. Who are they reporting to? Where is that going? Where does it go up the line? And where does it all end up? Because you can find the best players, but what if it's too bloated, too confusing, and there's no proper structures in place to even get the right names up to where you want them to be? A bloated scouting system without focus on game model. And look, there's going to be staff cuts and things like that to scouts, to analysts, to all of that. And part of that is not just, well, less is more, but it is to some degree a factor of, it's not necessarily about having the biggest scouting system. It's about how you use it correctly, right? Not to get to the old adage, but it's not the size of the scouting system. It is the motion of it, and that is the truth here as well. Though, how do you use the scouting system to find the players that you want? Is there a focus? Because if you don't have a game model, if you're just like, well, we need a striker, let's just look at strikers. Well, you're going to need so many scouts and analysts and things to figure it out, because you're going to have to look at every striker in the book, rather than being able to look at some numbers, some stats, and say, okay, here's the players who tend to be doing what we want. Now let's go watch them and focus and say, okay, we need a striker who's like this. We need a striker who's like that. They need to do these. They need to have these traits. Well, you can find all of that and then go watch them and see who's the best player to recommend, instead of like, well, do we want, like, you look at the names when we ended up with Rasmus Højlund, Harry Kane, Victor Osimhen, Rasmus Højlund, Kolomuani. Is there any rhyme or reason in those names when you think about it, aside from them being good strikers, like 2 top strikers, 2 young players? Is there any rhyme or reason in them? Not really. I mean, one could argue that Osimhen and Kane are both really well-rounded, but it's not like it was specific. And you look at how we've purchased players so many times in the past, this is what tends to happen. What does Frankie de Jong and Casemiro have in common? Nothing. Literally nothing in their game is similar. How do you go from one player to the next and there's no similarities between them? How do you go from a Gerard Braithwaite to a Matthijs de Ligt, even, for example, last summer? They're not the same player. They're not the same profile. They're not the same anything. In fact, they have completely different strengths and weaknesses. So this means you end up with a bloated scouting system that has no focus on who they're trying to recruit. Decision makers with no football knowledge. Now, this is an obvious one. This is a part of the poor reporting structures, is who are you reporting to and what business do they have being involved and making the decisions on players that you're going to get, on who we should buy. If it's going to it's at the top of the line, it's Ed Woodward, Joe Glazer, Richard Arnold, these guys. What use is that? How is that going to do anything? And that's how it's been for a long time. And even, of course, last summer, we did not have enough of the people in place early on to make, to necessarily be totally informed on the right decisions. This also includes the coach, and its manager-led recruitment has been the other major problem. So, when you say, well, how do you go from X player to X player and all of that? Well, it's manager-led recruitment. That's how you do that. You end up where manager says, instead of looking for profiles and saying, good, we want guys who can do this, here's the names, you're looking at the names in particular. So then what's the point of all the other names being found, all the other names being identified, when the focus is on specific players? And that leads to a poor game model as well, where you're playing with manager players, not club signed players, not players based on a model of how we want to moving forward. And then the other factor that goes under the radar a little bit, because it seems the opposite, is a low risk tolerance, immediate results chased. What this means is United being so scared in their recruitment approach to fail by signing young players who aren't necessarily ready, that they don't do it, that they're always chasing the ready-made option that is more expensive, bigger wages, more costly, and in a funny way ends up not working out. So these are the problems that are actually there underlying the reasons for all of those things we see in the apparency, the overpaying, all of that. It's all because of this. And, the culprits responsible, not the only ones, but, a system where Ed Woodward was for years picking the players, everything had to run through him. And then everything had to run up from him to Joel Glazer, who was often making decisions, vetoing players, stopping signings, things like that. Murtaugh came in and while he's a little bit more of a football guy and is a nice guy, essentially then was in the same boat. How do I bring this up the board and try to get approval from people? Ten Hag, who asked for a lot of control over transfers and specifically wanted a lot of his own players coming in. And I think, unfortunately, when we look at it, they are almost all failures. And that is really unfortunate at this point in time, but that's the truth of the matter. And there's so many good players that have been passed up on because of manager-led recruitment, in the last few years. So there's a lot of real reasons behind this, and I'm not even particularly picking on Ten Hag here, because it was the same through the rest, because we've never set up a correct system. But it was really obvious under Ten Hag that this was happening, but we've never had this. We've always had these poor reporting structures. We just kept hiring scouts, but where was the focus on who? We were looking at why we were signing players, why we were scouting players. And between the four of these here and any other managers, none of them are actually qualified to be the head of recruitment. None of them have the recruitment knowledge in that aspect to be picking the players that they should. And in a lot of instances, decisions being made to buy players for immediate results rather than, taking the risk of a player not working out, but paying a hell of a lot less where you can buy 2 or 3 and develop them and turn things around. So this is a really, really simplified look at things, okay, that I want to explain. And I don't want this to be taken literally like, oh, it's exactly the structure and this is how it works. And, pictures posted, this is how the structure is now, because I'm trying to simplify more of a hierarchy of decision making and process of reporting. Vivell's essential role as head of scouting and looking at all of this in everything is to essentially organize the scouts in a better fashion. Now, an example might be, Amram, Nick Cox, the guys from the academy, Darren Fletcher, etc., are coordinating with Wilcox and saying, look, this is their job. This is what they've got to pass along. This is what the first team has. This is what the academy has. We're lacking players here. We need players here. We're missing these profiles. That's what we need. That's what we're lacking in the first team. And that's a big part of Amram's job in shifting players out and evaluations, all of that, is looking and saying, this is what I need. This is what we are missing in the team. These are the profiles that are lacking and what I need in the team to make things work. Wilcox's job is obviously to ensure that, this matches up with the game model and identify that and kind of pull this all together, to coordinate with Vivell and others and say, okay, these are the things we need. Let's get the scouts looking for that. So maybe rather than a big scouting system that's just big and whatever, you get more focused groups where Vivell will be organizing them into saying, okay, these are the profiles we need. We need a striker who's, got pace running into the channels, but also is a player who does this and who does that. We need a left footer on the right side who does this and brings this kind of quality to the table, from a defensive standpoint. So we need a left-sided defender who's pacey, who covers the channels well, and who progresses well with his left foot. So these are profiles we need. Let's get people looking at these. Let's get people looking at these. Let's get people looking at these, and be quicker in moving and evaluating those at the senior and youth level. And so Vivell will be organizing that with scouts, with analysts, with etc., but also with his own network. And then coming to Wilcox, and obviously in coordination with Amram and coordination with Nick Cox, saying, okay, these are the profiles, these are the players that we've located for these specific profiles that we think would be best. And then they can make the decision on who we move for, on priorities, on all of that. And the goal is to be also a lot faster with this. But ideally, in general, it is a game model-led recruitment focus. This is the way we want to play. These are the profiles missing for it. We're looking at players specifically who align with this game model, who fit into that, into that way of playing. And that is the top-down kind of focus. So Amram is not picking the players, but he is saying, I'm missing these profiles in my team to play the way that we've decided we want to play. And Vivell is saying, okay, I'm going to go find those profiles and bring them to you. Smaller system, more focused scouting recruitment model. So again, rather than just like all talent in all the world, and we need to keep abreast of every striker imaginable because we don't know what the hell type of striker we're going to want now. We don't know who the next manager is going to want. We know we want to play this way. So if they don't meet that model, it's just not of interest to us. They're just not going to be, of that. And I can tell you that that's definitely not been how it has been for a long time. I mean, I remember when Solskjaer was here, like when we were looking at strikers at one point, the names that were coming across, like that we looked at, there was no rhyme or reason. And so it requires a huge scouting network when you have to say, well, we're just going to keep abreast of every striker in Europe or 650 right backs to evaluate because we don't know what any manager is going to want, and we don't know how it's all going to match up, and so that requires a lot more manpower than it does in a more focused model. The decisions will be streamlined because, of course, rather than it being a confusing, mess of like, well, manager wants this person, send it here, but we're looking at these players. Well, who gets to decide, who gets to pick? It's not like that. The names go up. These are the best rated players for each position. Who should we get? and it becomes, really up to Wilcox to decide. Obviously, then, it factors in alignment with Omar Barada on budgets and things like that as well. And they want to be faster in the market with this as well. They want to be able to do things quicker. They want to be able to make decisions, on a more immediate basis. This is what we want. Let's go out, let's go get them and get it done. So essentially it's a big kind of overhaul. What they don't want, are situations, and they want to change the focus in terms of what they're doing. And we've kind of seen some of that already, but I'll give some examples here. Age, because this is kind of the theme that overlies all of it. That's the structures. That's how they're going to look at it. But then you still have to consider, well, who are you buying? How do you decide quicker who you're going to buy when there's players recommended? Because scouts can recommend players who are 35 and 20, but you want to have, again, a very focused model of, we want you to look in like this, not just for the game model, not just for that, but we want to have a way that we approach recruitment. Is it young? Is it old? Is it a mixture? What is it? Because that also focuses it, instead of just having, again, we don't know if we're going to buy a 22-year-old or a 35-year-old. We don't know. It's just random, right? So there's focus that they want to have that aligns all of this, and also helps in who to scout, who to look at, but also how to make the decisions on transfers. So in terms of age, Vivell and Wilcox are very, very focused on youth. They're very focused on buying young players. That is definitely the case, and that's definitely where United are at too. They want a setup in terms of the overall recruitment approach where we're reaching to players and bringing players in who are more likely to be young and developing and growing and all of that, so that we have longevity rather than players who we're constantly having to replace every 2 years, and a squad is in a constant state of decline. So age is important. Big one here is the potential versus the big name. Focus on the right fitting player with high potential rather than the big name. Doesn't always mean cheap. So in most instances, in almost every instances, I use the example of De Ligt. I was discussing this the other day. You'd say, well, if you'd have De Ligt, who's a good player, like, let's bear this in mind. Someone might come up and say, look, De Ligt is a good player. We've got this other young player who's less proven but fits. Who do we buy? Well, in the past, it was always the big player every single time. Even last summer, you look at it, and I'm not necessarily talking about cost always, but it's always like the name. It's the De Ligt. It's the Casemiro. It's the, and by name can also be the name because the manager wanted that name. Like in the case of someone like Antony, it was a lot of it was being made on the name, like someone knows them, or they're a big name in the sport. And we've seen that many, many times, that it was like we wouldn't go for the younger player. We look at all the names we've signed under Woodward, under all of that, a lot of big names, but ignoring a lot of the potential signings that we could be making, that are better. But maybe just aren't that big name right now, and aren't that, are just, again, buying on that kind of potential. So this doesn't always mean cheap, and it doesn't mean doing this every single time, but it does mean that you're not just automatically defaulting to the bigger name player just because they're there, just because they're there, and it's like, oh, well, that's the obvious signing. It just means changing that focus on that. That's been a huge mistake. You take example I give here is Patrick Dorgu. Well, there's Nuno Mendes and there's Alphonso Davies. Now, did they check in on these? Yeah, because maybe if Davies was on a free, you get that deal done. But they weren't fixated on saying, well, we're not going to go for Dorgu because Mendes is a name. He's at PSG. He's successful. Amorim knows him. We're going to pick the name and sign Nuno Mendes and wait for him. Or it has to be one of those guys. We're going to go for somebody else. And that's why Kirkes and Dorgu were very likely the more likely signings all along for this. And they end up getting Dorgu. And I think it's going to work out very, very well. But the point is, there's a lot of players who could fit into this, and they don't have to say, well, we got to get Mendes because he's Mendes. It's Nuno Mendes, and Amorim knows him, and he's at PSG, and he's a big player. No, if they think based on their evaluations that Dorgu is probably as good or can be as good, then they're going to get him, and that's what they went and did. So it's a good example of that happening. At the same time, you have to realize it's not going to cross people out just because of the name too. Like you take Giovanni Kenda. Well, Kenda's been being tracked since way before Amorim. And I say way, not too long because he's quite young, but everybody in Europe knows of Kenda. and yet he's this top young talent. So sure, he's connected to Amram, but that's not why they're signing him. They're signing him because he's got huge potential. They could go for a different right back. They could go look at, the big leagues and find some top young player. They could go for the Jeremy Frimpong, because everybody knows Jeremy Frimpong, we should go get him. He's an attacking right back. But Kenda's the one that they want. Now, obviously, then it leads to questions on certain players like Victor Osimhen, where United are definitely going for a striker or two this summer. And that's just one little thing. It's very possible that they go for a second striker who's another young player. Based on my information that I understand, that they could go for another young striker with potential. But in addition to getting, a significant signing at striker. Now, you look at someone like Osimhen or maybe Gyökeres or something like that. Now, Osimhen, for example, they really do like him. But as I said, there's going to be a lot of complications in this. So they're not just going to automatically say, yes, we're signing Osimhen because, even though we've got potentially other names on the market, they're not just going to say, yeah, we're signing Osimhen, period. Because there's complications in it. There's things like the wages. There's things like all of that. And there's also considerations over where the team is at. So you've seen like some reports talking about they really like him, and other things like today from the Michelle guy who's a good journalist, that he's not a hot topic right now, but we'll see how it evolves. But they kind of want to avoid potentially making those deals, and that is true as well. But it also depends where they end up at the end of the season in terms of the consideration of this, in terms of the balance. If we win Europa League and we end up in Champions League, then the balance may shift to say, okay, we need to get one or two more established players in and not just buy on potential and have this steady growth curve. We need someone to come in now. It also may factor into convincing the player, things like how much, if you're in Europe, how much you're going to have to offer Osimhen to join in terms of compete with other clubs that are in Europe, versus if you are in Champions League, then, potentially you're a big draw for him. So it's a mixed bag on someone like Osimhen, but the point is, it's not just we're going to sign Osimhen, we're going to go for Osimhen, like it might have been in the past. But at the same time, it's not eliminating him. And that's important to say, because whenever I talk about this point, sometimes people take it as we'll never make a big signing again. No, it's not like that at all. But it's all about balancing and evaluating where we are as a club, where we are as a team today, with the right focus moving forward. And in tying into that, the long term, where are we going? Do we if we get an Osimhen, that probably means we're right there in Champions League. Whereas if we're expecting to be in Europa or Conference or not in Europe at all, it's better to buy development players and continue an upward trend, and not spend a lot of money while you're out of Europe, so that you keep the finances free for the future when you're back in. And we have to do it right. We definitely have to do that right. And then the other factor definitely is intensity and hunger. Players with something to prove, and this was where it does tie into age and the big name and all that. Players with something to prove and to gain and to grow, rather than already established good players looking to settle in. And this one kind of goes under the radar when you look at signings, like guys who come in and they're already good, and they want to settle. Like, there is a difference between those and getting young, hungry players who want to fight every second for their place in the team, and to grow and become a part of their career. And I think that that's where, United have failed, definitely in this respect, and with a lot of the big names, is they're players who maybe seem to lack that intensity when it matters. And I think you've seen it with other with other teams where we've seen them make some decent signings, where they've gotten players who even maybe look like they were on the decline a little, not from an age perspective, but were young, but are ready to wanting to prove something. And this is an important part of the characteristics that they're going to look for. And then cost. Cost is obviously a factor. United need to buy many players to fit the squad. They can resell young, affordable players. They want to avoid where every purchase they're making is like a 50 million, 60 million thing, and then they only get 3 or 4 players in, and they've got gaps in the squad. So one player gets injured and you have no left back. They want to balance this with top players, but it is a balance. It's like you'd rather than buying expensive players in every position, buy 2 young players. One, if it doesn't work out with one, you can turn around and sell them, but you have more options, more depth, more at least at the current iteration, where you can really fill the squad up and have a lot of good young players with potential in the team. But still, depending on the circumstances, like if you're getting into Champions League, balance that with saying, hey, yeah, we need a top player who's ready to play now in this position to help, spur the team on and make sure we're winning games too. So it is a balance there, but I think instead of like, again, years past where it's like every purchase we make is like 50 million, 60 million or higher, like, Mount, Onana, Hoyland, you know what I mean? Like we're making big purchases and everything is big purchases and it's Lissandro, Casemiro and Antony and even Ericsson, who's on big wages and older. Like Malacia was the only one they bought that summer, that first one that was like would probably fall into this. Well, it's a balance where maybe you sign one of those bigger players, maybe two, but then you sign four young guys, on more affordable deals who can come in. Maybe you sign, your Euro and Ugarte, but instead of Delict, you're signing two young center backs. You know what I mean? Like this kind of approach where you want to balance it better into getting these players. So that's a big part, of changing the focus as well, and what they want to look at in general in terms of what the theme will be moving forward, in recruitment in this summer. So I look at guys like Osimhen and you think, okay, maybe you'd get him. Like you look at the rest of the names on here and you maybe see it as a summer like this. If I'm not saying like right now, I don't think we'll get Osimhen. I'm just using this as kind of an example of how it may look. Like you get a young guy in Kenda. You get Dorgelis at 22. You've brought in Dorgu. You get in a midfielder like Hayden Hackney at Middlesbrough, young, high potential players, and then you topping it off and getting like an Osimhen or something, rather than it being like Osimhen, 60 million on Ederson, 70 million on some center back, Nuno Mendes, Frimpong, where it's all like established, well-known players. You don't even need a scouts for that. So it's a balance, and then you're spending 250 million and the wages are 200k, 150k, 200k, 150k, and if it doesn't work out, you have a serious problem where if you did something like the below, I didn't even do this on purpose, but it actually serves a good example, and people might panic at looking at that list and saying, oh my god, we're screwed if that's all we do. I'm not saying that, I'm just giving an example of it. But if you do look at it, it might be 40 million and 50k a week. Dorgelis might be 30 million and 50k a week. Dorgu was 25 million and 30k a week. Hackney might be 25 million and 50k a week. And so you end up with so much available space that you can do more, and you're leaving yourself open for the future. So it's a balance of things, that do matter on all of this, and that's what United, are intending, moving forward. And actually have one more thing here. The end goal is, of course, fast market movements, utilizing Vivell's network alongside United's great resources that they do have, a larger, deeper, younger squad with lower wages, in there, right? Not having these holes in the squad, but having a full squad that's deeper. You can even loan players out. It'd be better to have too many and loan a few out. That's young, that the curve is going up, that the wages are down, so that you can take advantage of good market opportunities for top players to round the squad out. Definitely a huge part of the focus, as well as a high physical flooring with squad of players built specifically for the game model, rather than just because they were good or because we know them. And then a smooth growth pattern of the overall squad rather than decline. And that comes down to age and such as well, where when you're buying all these young players, you should be always expecting the level of the squad to be improving, versus we're constantly being in fighting decline the last 10 years. If you look at the players we have, we're always having our best players on the decline. All of them. They're like dropping off. It's like, oh, they're getting worse. They're getting worse, they're getting older. All of our good performers are getting worse, and we don't have enough good young players to reverse that trend. That's a big change that they want to have. We need to have a solid growth pattern moving forward. And then the ability to bring in a few guaranteed top level players without choking the finances. So again, like the example I gave, where you could do that when we're ready. And maybe we get lucky and that's this summer. We get in Champions League, we're ready to at least add a couple decent, good top level players, and maybe not. Maybe it's, again, adding a really good base of solid players, kicking out 10, bringing in like 8 players, and clawing back into being a competitive team, not competing for the league, but in Look, the Nottingham Forests, the Bournemouths, the Brightons, these guys are competing. Aston Villas, these guys are competing in Europe. These guys are competing for Champions League places and things like that in the league. So you can do that while building this way. It's just those clubs then often don't have the finances to take the next step and get those top level players. Well, we do if we do it right. And so there's a lot of talk about, oh my God, we can't build like a Brighton or something like that, but you kind of can at the first stage. It's just that those clubs end up selling off all those young players. If Brighton were keeping their Caicedos and their McAllisters and these guys who are going on and doing amazing big things at bigger clubs, they wouldn't be dropping back down. That's kind of the point. Those clubs are forced to sell. Their model works, but they then have to sell those players to fund more because they don't have the revenue otherwise to maintain. That's not the problem at United. We don't have to sell those players when they turn into good players. We can keep them, and Brighton, if you look at the players that they've sold, if they kept the best ones and were able to spend on top of that, their model would be fine. So it's all about the balance of these things. And it's the same goes for somewhere like Red Bull, right? You look at the Red Bull model. Well, if they were able to keep all of those top players instead of selling them on, they probably become very competitive. And so, this is where United want to go moving forward. And this is a big part of the overall, overhaul. And I've talked about plenty of this over the last couple of months about the focus on youth, about age, about doing all of that. But this is the real overhaul of the full recruitment plans that they want to put in place, that they're working on with Wilcox and Vivell, and where we're going. And I think, obviously it's going to require patience. It's going to, we're not going to go into the summer and buy a bunch of stars and be back competing for titles next season. That's not the goal. And, it's too fast. But the better we do at this, the quicker we will end up there again. And the more we will see success. But we need this baseline to work, this baseline of good young players that we've brought in, to be successful at United and to grow with the team and to arrest the decline where we're seeing improvements on the regular rather than an overall decline. So that's what we should expect to see. Hopefully you found this kind of interesting and informative, and I thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Leave me your thoughts below. Turn notifications on. Tell me what you think about all of this. And obviously we'll have plenty over the next ensuing weeks and months about what this means in terms of the market and who we're looking at. But I think it's sort of becoming clear the direction that we are heading. Okay, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.